Welcome, everyone, to this discussion of mindfulness what skills. I hope you're all doing well today. So today we're going to be talking about the three mindfulness what skills. That's observing, describing, and participating. So these skills are what we do when we are actually practicing mindfulness. Each skill, observing, describing, and participating, is a distinct and specific activity. So these skills should each be practiced one at a time. So today we'll talk about what each skill is and how to do it. So the first skill is observing. And observing is simply noticing your experience through your senses. That can be noticing internally or externally. Why is it important to observe? Well, the first reason that it's most important to observe is to see reality as it actually is. Observing is like walking across a room full of furniture with your eyes open instead of closed. You can walk across the room either way. However, you're going to be much more effective if your eyes are open. If you don't like the furniture in your room or you're afraid of what might be in there, you might be tempted to close your eyes. But ultimately, it's just not that effective to walk through a room with your eyes closed because you keep running into the furniture. So we all walk around with our eyes closed sometimes. It's just a normal part of the human experience. But opening our eyes and observing can be really helpful because it brings us into the here and now. It brings us into the real, factual, present moment. If we're living in the past or we're living in the future, we're not really living at all. Observing is about learning to feel fully alive in the here and now. The second reason that it is important to observe is to get information into our brains so that we're able to change. If we walk through a room full of furniture with our eyes closed, we may miss important information that would allow us to make helpful changes to the way that we navigate the room. Whether our eyes are open or closed, the furniture is still there, right? So choosing to have your eyes closed doesn't eliminate the furniture. However, opening our eyes may allow us to stop bumping into it. So I want you to just take some time to consider your own tendencies to avoid noticing reality as it is. In what ways do you walk through life with your eyes closed? Just noticing, too, what the consequences of that may be for you. So you can pause the video here for a moment and just think through how you walk through life with your eyes closed at times, because we all do, and what the consequences are. And that may help you to think through how observing may be particularly helpful for you. So we've talked about why it's important to observe, but what do you actually do when you're observing? Well, observing is simply noticing what you're experiencing through your senses. So you can observe the world outside yourself through your five senses. That's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And you can also observe the world inside yourself through sensing your emotions, sensing your thoughts, sensing your internal bodily sensations. And what you sense really depends on where you focus your attention. So ultimately, you'll want to be able to observe events that are occurring both within your mind and body, like thoughts, sensations, emotions, images, memories, as well as events that are occurring outside of your body. So to observe, you have to simply step back, be alert, and notice. When you observe, it is the only thing you are doing, nothing else. Don't react. Don't label your experience. Don't describe it. Just notice it as it is. So we're going to practice external noticing, external observing through a five senses exercise. So what I'll have you do is just sit in a comfortable, mindful position, feet flat on the floor, back up straight in an alert position. Find something that's comfortable for you. I want want you just to begin by shifting your attention to your breath. Just noticing each inhale and exhale for a few moments. And then when you're ready, I want you to shift your attention to your sense of sight. So if your eyes are closed, I want you to gently open them for this piece of the practice. I want you to just look around you and become aware of your environment. Notice 5 things that you can see. If you're sitting in a place that you're very familiar with, try to find 5 things that you don't typically notice. And then, when you're ready, you can gently close your eyes again if you'd like to, or you can leave them open, gently resting them on a spot in the room. I want you to notice 4 things that you can feel using your sense of touch. Perhaps you notice the texture of your clothing on your skin. Perhaps you notice the sensation of your feet planted firmly on the ground. Just notice any 4 things that you can experience through your sense of touch. Now I want you to shift your attention gently to your sense of hearing. I want you to just notice 3 things that you can hear. That might be the sound of my voice, maybe the gentle humming of an air conditioner or a heater, or maybe you can even hear things outside like birds chirping. Just notice any 3 things that you can hear. Look for things you don't normally notice. Next, I want you to focus your attention on your sense of smell. Just bring your attention to any scents or aromas that you maybe typically filter out, anything that you notice in the room around you. And just notice 2 things that you can smell. And then finally, I want you to notice just 1 thing that you can sense through your sense of taste. If you have something nearby, you may take a sip of a drink or a bite of something that you have, or you can just simply notice the current taste in your mouth. And then when you're ready, just gently returning your awareness back to the room around you, allowing your senses to integrate again. And when you're ready, coming back to the room. I want you to just take a moment. Again, you can pause the video here, just taking a moment to reflect on what that was like for you to practice sensing through each of those 5 senses. I think often it can be really interesting just to notice how many things we don't typically observe and how full the room can be, so to speak, when we open our eyes and turn on the lights. So, in addition to sensing through our five senses, we can also sense our mind, our internal experience. And observing your mind, your thoughts in particular, can sometimes be very difficult. So this is because your thoughts about events may often seem to you just like facts instead of thoughts. Many people have never really tried to just sit back and watch their thoughts. When you observe your mind, what you'll see is that your thoughts and also your emotions and bodily sensations really never stop following one another. From morning when you open your eyes till night when you close them, there is just an uninterrupted flow of events inside your mind. You might notice thoughts, emotions, other bodily sensations, images, memories. And as you watch these, what you'll notice is that they'll come and go, just like clouds in the sky. You're never having just one thought forever, or just one emotion forever. This is what thoughts and feelings do inside the mind when we observe them. They come and they go. So some of us are really terrified to look at the contents of our own minds, and you may notice some hesitance to do that. And that's okay. If you're noticing some anxiety or nervousness about observing your own mind, it may be helpful to start observing things that are outside your body. Try holding something in your hand and noticing the weight of the object, its texture, its smell, its shape. Just really practice building that observing skill with things that are external to you. Some of us, on the other hand, can't stop analyzing our minds. So if this resonates with you, remember that it's important not to try to understand the mind or figure out the mind or analyze the mind. Instead, just adopt a curious attitude and simply watch what goes through the mind. So there are two ways of really practicing sensing the mind. The first is called focusing the mind. And this is really the practice of concentrating your attention on specific activities or specific objects or specific events. So many things can be used for focusing the mind. Just about anything can be used for focusing the mind. The most common mindfulness practice, though, is observing your breath. So your breath is the only thing you can be certain you will always have with you for as long as you live. For example, you could lose an arm, you could lose a leg, you can lose many things. But as long as you're alive, you have your breath. Focusing attention on your breath is a central part of all mindfulness meditation and a central part of all contemplative prayer practices. So I'm going to have us practice a brief mindfulness exercise now, focusing on the breath. So what I'll have you do is again assume a mindful position. So that means place your feet firmly on the ground. Have your back upright, straight in whatever chair you're sitting on. But find a comfortable position. And just begin to shift your attention to your breath. Now first, just noticing each inhale and exhale. Allowing your breath to flow naturally, not trying to change anything about it. Once your attention has comfortably settled, I want you to just begin counting. Counting 1 on the inhale, 2 on the exhale, 3 on the inhale, all the way up until you reach 10. And once you've reached 10, just gently restart at 1. And if you notice yourself getting distracted or you've lost track of your counting, that's totally normal. Just gently bringing your attention back to your breath and starting again at 1. And then when you're ready, just beginning to shift your attention back out into the room around you, wherever you are, and opening your eyes. And just notice what it was like to focus your mind intentionally on your breath. If you got distracted, that's totally normal. Focusing the mind, the practice of mindfulness is just that. It's really a practice of noticing when you get distracted and bringing your attention back to what you're focused on. So the second way of sensing the mind is called opening the mind. And this is really the practice of observing or watching whatever comes into awareness as it comes in and as it goes out. So opening the mind is really noticing thoughts, noticing emotions, noticing sensations that enter your awareness without holding on to or pursuing the topics that are coming into mind. It is simply to be aware of the flow of your moment-to-moment experience. It's like sitting and watching a conveyor belt, noticing the objects that go by, but without shutting it down to look at the objects more closely, or trying to speed it up to get the objects out of sight more quickly. Another metaphor for opening the mind is watching leaves go by on a stream without following these leaves to pay any closer attention to one particular leaf. And so now I would like us to briefly practice opening the mind. So if you can, I'll just have you again assume a mindful position. Place your feet flat on the floor. Have your back straight and alert, finding a position that's comfortable for you for the next few minutes. And you can leave your eyes opened or close them for this exercise. If you leave your eyes open, I'd like you to gently rest them on a spot in the room. I want you to begin by visualizing yourself out in a forest. I want you to notice that there's a gently flowing stream cutting through the middle of the forest. Really imagine what it's like to be there. Whether there's such thick foliage that it's a little dim, or if you can feel the sun on your skin. I want you to imagine yourself sitting beside this stream, this gently flowing stream. And as you sit there, I want you to notice a large tree that's gently dropping leaves on top of this flowing stream. Just notice the leaves gently floating along the surface of the water. And for the next few minutes, I want you to take each thought, each emotion, each sensation that enters your mind. I want you to place it on a leaf and let it float by. It may be helpful to imagine yourself actually taking that thought and pulling it out of your mind and placing it on top of a leaf. I want you to do this with each thought. A pleasurable thought, a painful thought, a neutral thought. Even if you have joyous, enthusiastic thoughts, place those on a leaf as well and let them float by. If you notice that your thoughts momentarily stop, just continue to watch the stream. Sooner or later, your thoughts will start up again. Just allow the stream to flow at its own pace. Don't try to speed it up and rush your thoughts along. This exercise isn't about trying to rush these leaves along as quickly as you can or get rid of your thoughts. You're simply allowing them to come and go at their own pace, in their own time. If you notice your mind saying, "This is dumb," or "I'm bored," or "I don't think I'm doing this right," just simply place those thoughts on leaves as well and let them pass. And if a leaf gets stuck, just allow it to hang around until it's ready to float by. You might also notice that as soon as that leaf passes out of view, it returns again. And that's normal too. If the thought comes up again, just watch it float by another time, and as many times as it comes through. And from time to time, you might notice that your thoughts really hook you and distract you from being fully present to this exercise. You may find yourself all the way down the stream with one of those leaves that's floated by. This is normal as well. So as soon as you realize that you've become sidetracked or distracted, just gently return your attention to the exercise. And then when you're ready, just gently letting go of that image of the stream and the woods, beginning to reconnect with the room around you, expanding your awareness. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. And so again, here I'd like you to just take a couple of minutes to notice what it was like to allow your thoughts to come and go. To take a step back from trying to control them, trying to make them different, and just noticing them and allowing them to be. So one thing that you may have noticed so far is that while observing sounds very simple, it can actually be surprisingly hard. And so I want you to notice this image here on the left side. And I want you to just imagine or think, what shapes do you see? Just practice observing what shapes there are in this image on the left. Okay, what did you see? Did you see a triangle? You may have said that you see a triangle, and that would make sense, because a lot of people say that they see a triangle. But in reality, there are actually no connecting lines. So there is no true triangle shape in this image. So our minds provide the missing lines, so we see something that we expect to see, even though it's not actually there. So this can, of course, be useful and save us a lot of time in life, but it can also cause a lot of problems when what we think we see doesn't line up with what's actually out there. So just think about any times where you thought you saw something or you thought you noticed something and it wasn't really there. Just imagine if you've ever had any problems with that. So as you can see, observing can really be a difficult skill to master, despite its deceptively simple instruction. And so just continue practicing observing, really flexing the muscle of observing, and you'll grow in that skill over time. So the second mindfulness skill is describing. And describing is really just applying a label to what you have observed. So you may need to observe before you can describe, but you can't observe and describe at the same time. So why should we bother describing? How is adding a label to what we've observed helpful in any way? Well, it allows us to distinguish what is observed from what is not observed. Describing really allows us to develop the ability to sort out and discriminate observations themselves from the mental concepts and thoughts we have about what we observe. So responding to thoughts and concepts as if they are facts can lead to unnecessary emotional distress and confusion. So for example, when you find out that your child stole money, your mind might immediately describe that as, my child is going to end up in jail. And that description, of course, causes emotional distress. But if you'll notice, you really haven't observed your child going to jail. And so describing can help you sort out what has actually been observed from what has not been observed. And if you're reacting to the idea that your child is going to go to jail when that hasn't actually happened, you may be experiencing distress that's unnecessary. The second important reason to practice describing is that when we describe what we observe, other people around us can correct or validate what we perceive. So they can tell us, oh, that's not really what I observe, or yes, I observe exactly the same thing. This process is really the same process that underlies how we all learn as children. For example, we say words and then the adults around us correct our descriptions until we become proficient at describing what we see in the environment. It can be helpful to get another person's perspective, especially in situations that may be ambiguous. Interpersonal situations are notoriously ambiguous, and so describing what you observed can help allow there to be room for some helpful feedback. Writing down observations can be particularly helpful in allowing us to process information and organize events that we've observed throughout the day. So it can be really helpful to take our observations, the things that we've noticed and sensed, externally, internally, and put words on those things. And once we've put words on those things, that allows us to manipulate them in a way that is much more difficult to do if we haven't named them. So again, describing, especially through writing, can be helpful in processing and organizing information and allowing us to construct a framework for understanding it. So how do you describe? Well, describing is simply adding words to what you observe. True describing, true description sticks just to the facts. And sticking just to the facts really means unhooking from your opinions and your interpretations. So I'm going to have you take just a few moments to practice describing the image on the left. Just add basic descriptors to what you observe in the picture. Okay. Did anyone notice themselves describing this face as angry? It would be really normal if you did. I think most people would describe that face as angry. It's important to remember that we can't actually observe an emotion that's not our own. So now I want you to try again describing this image. This time, I want you to imagine that you are instructing someone in how to draw it. What would you tell them? Okay, what did you come up with this time? You may have described the shapes that you see. For example, a large circle or two eyes shaped as ovals. You may have described the eyebrows in the picture as being lines that are downturned slightly in the center, or the edges of the mouth being pointed downwards somewhat. You may have noticed that the face is red and surrounded by white. So as you can see, again, just like with observing, describing sounds simple, can actually take a lot of practice because it's often not what we're used to doing. So it can be really helpful to remember what also cannot be described. So very broadly speaking, if something was not observed, it can't be described, because describing is adding a label to what you have seen, what you have observed, and so if you cannot observe it, you cannot describe it. So, no one can observe the thoughts of others. Assumptions about what others are thinking are just that, assumptions. You can describe the assumptions that you're noticing yourself making. So, for example, you think I'm lying is not a description of an observation. I keep thinking you think I'm lying is a description of what you're able to observe about your own internal experience. So you think I'm lying, not a description of an observation, because you can't observe somebody else's internal experience. I keep thinking you think I'm lying is a description of your own thought, and so therefore you can describe it. So it can be really helpful to, in general, try framing things as, when you do X, I feel or think Y. Okay, so when you look at me with your eyes downturned as I'm talking, I feel or think you think I'm lying. That would be an example. So framing things in this when you do X, I feel or think Y way allows you to describe your own thoughts and feelings, and it also allows clarification from the other person. So just as we can't observe the thoughts of others, we can't observe the intentions of others. It is extremely difficult to read other people's intentions correctly, and incorrectly characterizing others' intentions can be very painful. It can be very painful for you. It can also be very painful for them. We tend to pay attention to the impact of other people's actions on us and then assume whatever impact it had was intentional, but that's not always the case. So for example, I'm feeling hurt becomes you did that to hurt me, right? So you had the experience of being hurt and then assume that it was done on purpose. So again, in this situation, you want to practice describing what you notice about the impact of someone's actions, right? So when you didn't call me, I felt hurt. That would be an accurate description. So the next piece here is that no one can observe the feelings or emotions of others. While we can't see the internal experiences of other people, we can observe a lot of components of emotion. We can observe facial expressions, we can observe tone of voice, we can observe actions that are linked to emotion. For example, we can observe if someone is crying. These expressions of emotion can be misleading though, because a lot of emotions actually share similar expressions. So for example, you may cry when you're sad, and that's what we often think of, but you might also cry if you're really happy. You might also cry if you're very frustrated. And so it's important to remember that while the things that you can observe might give you some thoughts about what emotion is occurring for somebody, you really can't observe that person's emotion. Another example is that people may sound angry or irritated when they're very anxious. We also often incorrectly assume that someone who does something must have wanted to do it, when in fact, people do things for a lot of reasons. Another person may have felt coerced or afraid to say no, and that's why they did something. Similarly, people don't do a lot of things that they do want to do. You may have noticed this in yourself. So we may assume if you wanted to, you would have done it. For example, if we call a person very late at night and they answer, we may assume incorrectly that they wanted to talk to me, right? When in fact, perhaps they did not, but they felt obligated. Okay, so the last piece here is that no one has ever observed a concept, a meaning, a cause, or a change in things. Concepts and meaning come from putting together observations in our minds in an attempt for us to make sense of them. We infer causes and changes from observing the world and using logic to draw conclusions about the world. So for example, if I see you bump a glass of water with your hand and the glass of water falls over, I infer that you bumping into the glass actually caused it to fall over. But I didn't observe the cause because cause is a concept and not something that can be directly observed. So I could say that I observed you bumping the glass and I observed the glass of water falling over, but I can't say that I observed you causing the glass of water to fall over. Conclusions and comparisons are similarly the result of mental calculations, right? So for example, if you were tired yesterday and today you appear energized, I might say, you're more awake than yesterday, or you are less sleepy than yesterday. But this statement is actually a result of comparing an observation from yesterday to an observation today, rather than being an observation in and of itself. So you can't observe that something is more or less than something. You can only observe two things and then make a comparison of those observations. But that's not really an observation in and of itself. So these things that cannot be described can be kind of difficult to wrap your mind around at first, because we spend a lot of time describing things that we haven't actually observed. And so just refer back to this list as you're practicing describing, and just practice noticing whatever tendency you might have to describe the thoughts of others, the intentions of others, other people's feelings or emotions, or things that can't be described. And just spending a lot of time in intentional practice of describing with just the facts can be helpful. So I'd like for us to actually practice describing. And I mentioned before that we can observe our thoughts like they are things on a conveyor belt. And so what I'd like you to do is just assume again a mindful position, placing your feet on the floor, sitting in an upright and alert position. And I want you to just take a few moments to observe your thoughts as if they were on a conveyor belt. Just noticing as they come in and then pass out of view. Then when you're ready, I'd like you to start practicing sorting your thoughts into boxes. For instance, you might notice this is a planning thought about what I'm going to do after I watch this video. Or this is a worry thought. This is a thought about the future. This is a thought about the past. Just practice for a few moments, sorting whatever thoughts you notice into boxes. You may notice yourself beginning to sort your thoughts into this is a good thought or this is a bad thought. Again, remembering that we can only describe what we can observe. And so you may be able to notice that a thought is painful or that a thought is pleasant, but bad and good are really concepts that can't be observed. So just practice sorting them into what you can observe. And then when you're ready, just gently letting go of the image of the conveyor belt, returning your attention again to the room around you. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. So just take a couple of moments to notice what it was like for you to practice describing. Was it difficult to place labels on what you observed? Did you find yourself wanting to add more than just the facts to your descriptions? If so, that's totally normal, and it's also helpful information. So again, you can just return to this exercise anytime you want to practice describing. So our last what skill is participating. Participating means to enter wholly and with awareness into life itself, non-judgmentally, in the present moment. Participating is really the ultimate goal of mindfulness. So why should we bother participating? What is there to be gained from participating? Well, the first is to experience flow. And flow is really a state of being that many consider to be an optimal experience. It's incompatible with boredom. It's associated with intensive enjoyment and a sense of control. It's thought to occur especially in tasks where there's a right balance of challenge and skill. So challenging enough that you're not bored and that it keeps your attention, and that you're skilled enough to engage in that task without becoming frustrated or discouraged. You may have experienced flow if you've ever played an instrument or a sport. You may have experienced flow in those activities. You may find when you're in a state of flow that you really lose track of time because you're so engaged with what you're doing. And participating is really incompatible with self-consciousness. When we throw ourselves wholeheartedly into what we're doing, we generally cease to be aware of ourselves. And for similar reasons, it's incompatible with a sense of exclusion. So we may also lose awareness of ourselves from as separate from everything else when we're in a state of flow, when we're fully participating. And when you lose awareness of yourself as separate from everybody else, from everything else, it's really impossible to feel excluded. In addition, when we're participating, things that may take great effort feel effortless. And this is a result of feeling fully absorbed in what it is that you're doing. Next, when we're fully participating, we're fully present to the here and now. And the here and now, not only of our own lives, but also to the lives of our loved ones as well. To be compassionate, to be connected, to be loving towards ourselves and to other people, we must be present. And now the last reason. Participation is a fundamental characteristic of skillful behavior. To really learn and implement the DBT skills, we must be able to engage these skills with mindful awareness rather than getting distracted by our thoughts. So again, if you've ever played an instrument or a sport, particularly the pieces of those tasks that you know really well that have maybe entered into muscle memory, you may notice how thinking too much about what you're doing actually makes it more difficult to skillfully complete the task. The same thing is true for DBT skills. So those are all the reasons why participation is so important. So how do you participate? You may have grown up being told to stop, look, and listen before crossing the street. Observing and describing are really the stop, look, and listen of the mindfulness skills. Participating is like the actual walking across the street. After you've stopped, after you've looked and you've listened, you can really throw yourself completely into crossing the street. And this is true of anything that you're participating in, is to throw yourself wholeheartedly into what you're doing. It also means entering into the present moment, even if it's uncomfortable. So participating isn't always joyous. And so at times what is present in this moment is uncomfortable, is painful. It's also acting opposite to self-consciousness is one way to participate. So just ask yourself, if I was not self-conscious, how would I hold my body? What expression would my face make? How would I speak? Embody what it would look like to be completely in the moment. And that can help you actually enter completely into the moment. And then finally, engage completely. Be involved. Opt in. If it's raining, just play in the puddles like a kid would and enjoy the rain. So we're going to practice participating here. And it can be really difficult to describe exactly what that experience is like. So if you would, I'd like to have you grab a piece of paper and something to write with. You can pause the video here if you have to go retrieve those things. And then when you're ready, I want you to take the writing utensil in your non-dominant hand, whatever hand you do not usually write with, and I want you to practice writing your full name, but I want you to write it backwards. So write it a couple of times. and just notice what that's like. Okay. What was that like for you? How aware were you of what was going on in your mind? I said notice what it was like. I bet it was actually really difficult to notice what it was like because it takes a lot of attention and absorption in the task to be able to do that. It takes a lot of mental energy. Did you feel fully engaged? Just reflect on what that experience was like and think of any other times that you may have had a similar experience. Okay. So, how do you choose when to observe, when to describe, when to participate? There's a couple of important guidelines here. So, you want to practice observing and describing when something is new or difficult. So you want to observe first and then describe. So really take a step back from participating in an activity when you are making errors or don't know how to do something. When you're participating, you're very aware, but you're not actively focusing your attention on yourself and analyzing the details of what you're doing. At times, you must step back, you must slow down, pay attention to what you're really doing. In particular, when you notice there's a problem in your life, you need to step back and actively observe and describe both the problem situation and your responses to it. You can then figure out what's wrong, learn the skills needed to solve the problem, and return to participating. For example, you can only play the piano really well if you participate in the act of piano playing. That is, if you fully play. But if you've learned an incorrect technique, you may want to learn the correct version. So to do so, you have to step back and observe and describe what you're doing wrong. Then practice the correct way over and over until you're skilled. You can then stop observing and participate again. And I just want to point out that the same is true for your practice of DBT skills. You're noticing that they're not working in quite the way you anticipated, or there's difficulty in applying them. Practice observing and describing as you use these skills. And that can help you identify the places that a change needs to be made. You can solve the problem and then begin to participate. So the other guideline is to practice the most difficult skill the most often. I'm sure you're delighted to hear that. Different people have trouble with different skills. Some people participate all the time, and that's actually their problem. They don't notice they're participating in a way that drives other people crazy, for example. Other people have a lot of trouble with participating, especially people who are shy, people who are socially anxious, people who are very afraid of failing. All they do is stay on the sidelines and observe. Other people have very busy analytical minds. They also stay back from living in the moment, but instead of just observing, they're analyzing and thinking and ruminating about each event as it occurs. Life is just like a running commentary on the universe inside their head. So in this situation, describing is actually in overdrive. So spend some time reflecting on which skill is most difficult for you, and then practice it as often as you can. Thank you for joining me today, and good luck in your mindfulness skills practice.